the Lachish were dark-skinned and phenotypically African. We know that's probably the case, but it gets deeper than that. We know any of these kind of like old Neolithic samples, you know, anything from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, probably right up until quite recent, you're going to be dealing with black people across the Levant, the Arabian Peninsula, and Africa.
Alas, subtle admission ancient Egyptians were Eurasians. He doesn't realize he just conceded the point by agreeing with the study. The game, of course, is to usurp and replace Eurasians, and as you heard him say, rebrand them as phenotypically black Africans from the Paleolithic to recent era. As always, you can depend on him to cite zero supporting evidence. The irony is hilarious. He's never once associated ancient Egyptians with Levantines, yet with recent genomic revelations surrounding the Old Kingdom Nuerat individual, his hand has been forced and he's completely lost it. Asserting that the Iron Age people of Lachish were phenotypically black African is utmost reactionary cope. The archaeology and art from Lachish itself, reliefs, figurines, and Assyrian depictions of its inhabitants show Caucasoid features consistent with genetics. The Iron Age Judeans of Lachish cluster firmly with neighboring Levantine and broader West Eurasian populations. No, we are not dealing with any black people across the Levant, Arabia, or what have you, outside of Sub-Sahara. The ancient genetic landscape of Eurasia and North Africa does not include Sub-Saharans. The lies told by pathological liars are grandiose and fantastic in scope. Notice he never dares compare a sub-Saharan skull, whether Bantu, Nilotic or Khoisan, with an Egyptian, North African or Levantine skull. He doesn't have the evidence, and he doesn't have the nerve. Such a comparison would end the debate. His entire story would collapse. The city of Lachish, located in Judah, was a major fortified stronghold in the lowlands of southern Israel. Its Iron Age occupation spans several centuries from roughly 1200 to 586 BC. The cranial characteristics of the Nuerat individual are compared to the Lachish individual of level 3, which is dated at approximately 701 BC, the time of the Assyrian siege, and before the Babylonian destruction of 586 BC. This is the most significant find of skulls and bones of the people of Lachish, and the Old Kingdom Egyptian Nuerat individual shows cranial affinity with them. But how did the ancient Egyptians perceive the physical appearance of Levantine peoples, such as those from Lachish? Egyptian art provides vivid illustrations of these peoples from periods long before 701 BC, and none of them display what this charlatan describes as a black people sporting sub-Saharan African phenotype. The procession of the Amu at Beni Hassan in the tomb of Khnumhotep II is dated to the 12th dynasty Middle Kingdom, or otherwise 1900 BC. This date is placed firmly in the Bronze Age, therefore making the mural representative of Bronze Age Levantines almost 3 times as old as the Lachish skull from 701 BC. Do you see this so-called black African phenotype represented in this early depiction of Levantines? I don't, and neither do you. This shows us that the ancient Egyptians consistently differentiated Levantines and themselves from Nilotics in their visual representations. The mural shows a group of West Eurasian Levantines labeled Amu, with a leading figure labeled Abisha the Hyksos. The scene vividly illustrates interactions between Egyptians and Western Eurasians at the time. Notice the tomb owner, Khnumhotep II's reddish skin tone, while that of his wives Keti and Chat, dressed in typical Egyptian attire, resembles that of the Levantines. None of these people represent black skin or sub-Saharan phenotype as seen among South Sudan's Nilotics. Look at the skin tones and side profiles. The standard Egyptian features and coloring are unmistakable. Shown here, the 4th dynasty mural of Prince Kawab and 5th dynasty statue of Ptahhotep. The only way to dismiss this evidence is to claim authentic Egyptian craftsmanship is fake, while prostituting artificial AI caricatures as real representation. Khnumhotep is depicted with the same skin tone and facial features as Minoans from Crete, as shown in Egyptian murals. The Egyptians themselves illustrated both groups in a comparable way. Minoans plot with early Anatolian farmers and the Aegean Neolithic. They're modelled as mostly Anatolian Neolithic related with additional Caucasus/Iran related ancestry. They're Eurasians, they all cluster in PCA with ancient Egyptians. Light to dark, never black. So now what? The only move left for TKM is to invent yet another lie claiming Minoans were black. That's how far the goalpost must be shifted to sustain the Afrocentric narrative. Here, another exercise in simple observation. Let's examine 12th dynasty Bronze Age Egyptian illustrations, contemporary with the Bronze Age Levantine mural at Beni Hassan as seen above. Keep in mind, the depiction of Levantines in the Beni Hassan murals predates the Lachish sample in Israel by nearly 1,000 years. TKM specifically asserted that all inhabitants of the Levant and Arabia were black and displayed black phenotypes from the Paleolithic through the recent era. Oh yes, the deceitful fraud did say that we were dealing with black people across the Levant, Arabia, and Africa, but we're waiting for him to present this grand evidence that he never will.
Any of these kind of like old Neolithic samples, you know, anything from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, probably right up until quite recent, you're going to be dealing with black people across the Levant, the Arabian Peninsula, and Africa.
So where, in any of these illustrations of actual Bronze Age Egyptians, is this so-called black phenotype represented? I don't see any, and neither do you. Ancient Egyptians closely resemble their Levantine counterparts in hair, skin, and overall phenotype. This explains why the Old Kingdom Nuarat individual clusters with them. You'd think he's trying to convince his idiot seal clappers that the entire population was black in the ancient world, yet every illustration shows, well, not a single one. They aren't black in phenotype, skin, or hair. Any explanation, TKM? Let's explore this at a deeper level. Observe these 12th dynasty Nebson jars. Note they have no paint that would indicate skin tone. Now, let's do a side-by-side comparison with TKM's phony caricature. Notice the glaring distinctions. When Afrocentrics resort to any level of fraudulence, it exposes them outright. They are their own worst enemies. Even without a trace of paint, it's obvious that the phenotypical attributes don't match, a contrast they can't hide. Ancient Egyptians are nothing like TKM's phony caricatures. A 12th dynasty stela of Keti and his wife Tenet resembling their Levantine counterparts, TKM can't do any better than fabricating this sad, frustrated caricature. He's not on his game. What phenotypically black people is this fraud talking about? Do tell, because I want to know. Talking about black skin and phenotype all across the Levant, Arabia, and into Africa, right up until recent era, such as the 700 BC Iron Age Lachish individual that shares cranial affinity with Old Kingdom Nuarat. Khnumnacht and Senwosret one resemble the Levantine people depicted above. Could it be because they are genetically related? Afrocentric liars make me laugh. It just goes on and on. I could spend all day presenting images of 12th dynasty Egyptians resembling their contemporary Levantine counterparts, each one exposing the fraudulence of his caricatures. But the point here is to show actual painted depictions of Egyptians, clear, authentic representations, not unpainted murals or damaged, unpainted stone figures that Afrocentric zealots conveniently cling to. We could stop here, but let's proceed. A little more salt in the wounds, shall we? Another vivid representation of Levantines carried down through the corridors of time, immortalized in the 18th dynasty tomb of senior treasury official Sobekotep, circa 1400 BC, New Kingdom reign of Thutmose IV, a moment frozen in time and still 700 years before the life of the Iron Age Lachish individual who shares cranial affinity with Old Kingdom Nuerat. Again, no black sub-Saharan phenotype to be seen or had among Egyptians or Levantines. Notice the Nilotic individual for comparison and how Egyptian artisans depicted Nilotics phenotypically different from Levantines. But wait a minute. All of these Levantines, from the Paleolithic, Neolithic, Bronze Age, and right up to the Iron Age Lachish individual of 700 BC, who shares affinity with Nuerat, are supposed to have black skin with black phenotypes according to TKM. So who is lying, the ancient Egyptians or TKM? So much for this magical black skin and black phenotype all across the Levant. How do these Levantines and Nilotics fare when compared and contrasted with ancient Egyptians? Why does this fraud insist everyone be in blackface? Eighteenth dynasty Bronze Age Egyptians resemble their 18th dynasty Bronze Age Levantine counterparts, and the contrast is striking when compared not only to the Nilotic figure but also to TKM's phony caricature. In fact, it serves as the perfect standard of comparison. He literally exposes himself. Contemporary with the 18th dynasty Bronze Age tomb of Sobekotep is the tomb of Rekhmire. Here we also find depictions of Levantines alongside Minoans. Once again, Egyptians, Levantines, and Minoans consistently share similar physical attributes, while Nilotics, including this laughable caricature, stand apart. These figures are supposed to represent blacks with a distinctly black phenotype, yet if that were true, they should resemble this pathetic and distorted caricature. And still, we see absolutely none of that here. The writings on the wall. No wonder Nuerat clusters with Iron Age Lachish. The illustrations support the genetic findings. Represented are depictions of Egyptians from a period close in time to that of the Iron Age Lachish skull, which clusters with Old Kingdom Nuerat. Likewise, Old Kingdom Nuerat shares affinity with 26th to 30th dynasty Egyptians, demonstrating continuity throughout the span of Egyptian civilization. Keep in mind, according to the fraud's narrative, we're supposed to be looking exclusively at black skin tone and black phenotype at this late date. Yet notice what's actually there, the magically missing black skin tone and black phenotype. Why didn't the Egyptians ever depict themselves like his phony caricature? How much hate does it take to erase the way Egyptians and Levantines actually looked and how they depicted themselves just to usurp them with himself? His next move will be to claim, well, blacks can have these features too. No, you won't find these phenotypical traits. The hair, the skin, the bone structure, the DNA in sub-Saharan populations, which is exactly why they don't cluster with Eurasians. His old black supremacist racism collapsing right before his eyes. At best, all TKM can do is one of 8 things out of sheer desperation. 1. Point his audience to a range of light to dark-skinned Egyptians and deceptively label them as black, just as he did with Lachish. 2. Highlight wooden statuary that has darkened or discolored over time. 3. Showcase symbolic imagery associated with death, but never show the same individual as they appeared in life. 4. Point to damaged statuary or murals as evidence of sub-Saharans in ancient Egypt. 5. Point to facsimiles and freshly painted plaster copies. 6. Take advantage of a vulnerable software program that has admitted flaws or does not include light skin alleles in its analysis. 7. Ignore diversity within other populations outside of sub-Sahara. 8. Deny all archaeological, anthropological, and genetic data. Under no circumstances can TKM present actual individuals with black skin, black facial features, and kinky hair as true representatives of the ancient Egyptian populace. Indeed, his silly caricature exposed his ruse. It's as if he's blind to the obvious. Maybe he should get his eyes checked, or at least a stronger prescription for his glasses. Patient suffers from selective vision, sees black phenotype everywhere except in reality. Now let me direct your attention to this golden nugget, straight out of the donkey's mouth. TKM made this video 2 years ago. This is important because it was before the Old Kingdom Nuerat genome was published.
Depicting the Battle of Kadesh, or the Siege of Dapur, in which the Syrian forces are depicted in a completely different tone and phenotype to the king. Yet no similar accusations are made about Ramses' racial hatred towards the Levantine, perhaps because
Notice how quick he is to point out, falsely I will add, that this fraudulent image, a reproduction painted within the last 100 years, shows Levantines as a different skin shade from Egyptians, when in fact the originals have no pigments at all. The siege of Dapur took place in the Bronze Age, 500 years before the Iron Age Lachish individual lived, and yet by his own assertion, Bronze Age Levantines are supposed to be exclusively black in both skin tone and phenotype across the Levant and Arabia. Yet here he is indoctrinating his horde of circus seals that Bronze Age Levantines looked nothing like Egyptians in skin or phenotype. Why is that? Before the Nuerat genome was published, he swore up and down that Bronze Age Levantines looked nothing like Egyptians. Now that the Nuerat genome is out, he's done a full-blown 180. Suddenly, magically, Levantines are instantly black in skin and phenotype, because after all, Afrocentrics can't have Egyptians clustering with straight-haired, olive-skinned Caucasoids. It would bruise and batter their racist egos. Amazing what lies can accomplish. Zero integrity. His inconsistencies constantly invalidate his entire argument. It exposes the level of deceit and deception, how he viewed Levantine peoples before the Nuerat genome was published, and how his attitude completely changed after. He flips, flops, and flails in whichever direction is most convenient to push his false narrative. And no, that is not the Battle of Kadesh. Those scenes depict Seti, the first on Libyan campaigns. They are Bronze Age Libyans, but the unknowing fraud deceived his audience, lumping them in as if they were Levantines at the Battle of Kadesh. And Kadesh is, of course, located in the Levant. That's right, he just confused North African Libyans with Levantines and Ramses II with Seti I. He slipped up. According to the flip-flopping fool, doesn't know who is who or which battle is which. We're supposed to be dealing exclusively with black skin and phenotype in the Levant, Arabia, and into Africa. His confusion leads to lie after lie, blunder after blunder. Afrocentrics favor turn-of-the-century fakes with fresh paint over genuine Egyptian craftsmanship. These fraudulent reproductions provide the loophole they desperately depend on to prop up their culture vulture ideology. The fraud would tell his band of clapping seals that these people were switching skin color and phenotype back and forth like a merry-go-round. Can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard his spots? No. By the way, the image on the left, heavily dependent upon by Afrocentrics, is also fake. But you know what's not fake? This image of Ramses II smiting a Nilotic enemy, as if no one can distinguish difference in their phenotypes. And skin color. Perhaps this is exactly why Afrocentrics do not show murals like this. It's quite simply too much to bear or explain, and hurts their feelings. Another depiction of Ramses II. Exact same skin tone, exact same facial features as his Levantine captive, and neither look like the Nilotic. This fraud claimed that we were dealing exclusively with black skin and black phenotype. Where is it?
This is how the Egyptians are depicted there, okay? This is how the Amu are depicted, or the Asiatics. This is how the Nehesu or the Kushites are depicted.
Here he is again, another video, another example, literally pointing at depictions of Levantines that look nothing like the blacks he fantasizes. First he says they look nothing like ancient Egyptians, but after the Nuarat genome was published, and because Nuarat clusters with Levantine Iron Age Lachish, suddenly the entire Levant is black. How much more proof do we need that Afrocentrism operates like a mental disorder? He says one thing, but the archaeological evidence says another. To ignorantly exclaim ancient Levantines were black with a black phenotype while literally pointing at Egyptian depictions of Levantines that show no black skin or black phenotype is absurd. Is he suggesting the ancient Egyptians were liars? You just have to laugh. He pulled the same stunt with East Indian skulls. Recall, he presented a study on his screen, literally showing East Indian skulls with the dolichocephalic trait, while claiming only black Africans have the dolichocephalic trait.
Skin tone of the Egyptian matches exactly how ancient Egyptians are normally depicted, with a very deep brown skin.
Ancient Egyptians and ancient Levantines literally shown within the same skin shade and phenotype. Neither one is black like the Nilotic. Game over. There's a lot to unpack in this disingenuous image and nonsensical remark. Enough nonsense here for an hour-long video on its own. For starters, the Tarim mummies date to 3000 BC, therefore predating Iron Age Lachish, and immediately destroys the wet dream of black skin and phenotype in the Levant Arabia, anywhere or everywhere. In fact, this extends all the way into Central Asia and China, constantly gaslighting his gaggle of clapping seals, insisting everyone was black, while pointing at Tarim Basin mummies with white skin. Is this TKM fraud the best Afrocentrism has to offer? Where is all this fabled black skin and black phenotype that we're supposed to be dealing with across the Levant, Arabia, and Africa? Why does he keep pointing us to people who completely lack those features? The Tarim Basin mummies directly contradict his fantasy of black everywhere from ancient times until recently.
Anything from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, probably right up until quite recent, you're going to be dealing with black people across the Levant, the Arabian Peninsula, and Africa.
The Tarim mummies' Western physical features are probably due to their connection to the Pleistocene ANE gene pool. They had unmistakably Western features. In other words, they were Caucasoid. The Pleistocene ANE extends back 25,000 years ago, meaning their characteristic physical traits are at least that old, if not older. So what happened to this black skin, black phenotype that's supposed to be everywhere in the ancient world, TKM? This predates modern sub-Saharan morphology, which is terminal Holocene forward. Refer to my older videos with sources regarding this subject. Let's read this nonsensical remark. The noses of Egyptian mummies are notably larger than known Eurasian mummies like the Tarim. What does known even mean? Known versus unknown, that's just empty filler. Everyone outside of Africa is designated in scientific literature as Eurasians and/or non-Africans. Point blank. That's not up for debate. And yes, there are Eurasian lineages inside Africa too, also not up for debate. The only group outside that category are sub-Saharans. Sub-Saharans are not Eurasians, not non-Africans, and no published study has ever classified them as such. You only believe otherwise if you live on Fantasy Island. When he says Tarim mummies have smaller noses than Egyptians, he's trying to set up a contrast between Egyptians and Eurasians, as if to suggest Egyptians were somehow not Eurasians. But here's the problem with that notion. Nasal variation is huge within Eurasian populations. There are Mediterranean and Northern European groups with small to large noses and Central Asian groups with small to large noses. You can't cherry-pick one mummy, such as a female Tarim Basin mummy, and act like she represents all Eurasians. That's pseudoscience. Tarim mummies aren't a baseline for all Eurasians. They're an isolated Bronze Age group in far western China with ANE steppe and Iranian-related ancestry. Using them as the standard Eurasian nose is like comparing Scandinavians to Greeks and then pretending one disqualifies the other. The framing is dishonest. He's not talking about anthropology. He's using smaller versus larger noses as a dog whistle to push the idea that Egyptians weren't Eurasian. It's selective comparison, nothing more. Bottom line, when he says Tarim mummies have smaller noses than Egyptians, he's trying to create a fake dichotomy, as if Egyptians' features automatically remove them from Eurasian variation, but that collapses once you remember how diverse Eurasian morphology really is, and ancient Egyptians fall within that spectrum. Egyptians themselves are Eurasian. Their skeletal traits consistently overlap with Levantines and Mediterranean peoples. Claiming their noses are too large compared to Eurasians is arbitrary, as though only Tarim mummies equals Eurasian equals only small noses. He's playing a shell game. If a human nose preserves well in the cases of some mummies, it becomes their so-called black racial proof. By that logic, if we found a mummy in Sub-Sahara with a small nose or one degraded beyond recognition, we could just as easily declare them Caucasoid. But of course, Afrocentrics would never accept that standard when applied in reverse, because the ideology isn't about truth, it's about theft and projection. By harping on nose-size comparisons, he actually admits what he's been lying about. Eurasians don't have black phenotype. This is Churchenman of the Tarim Basin. His nose resembles Ramses II. Now what? Where is the black skin and phenotype? Furthermore, he's being completely disingenuous by comparing a male nose to a female's, when females naturally tend to have smaller features. When he was looking for images of Tarim Basin mummies, he came across Churchenman, but apples to apples, intentionally ignored it, as it did not fit within his agenda. When is he going to show us a genuine Negroid mummy from sub-Saharan Africa, so we can actually make a proper comparison? Amenhotep I's nose is small. It's smaller than Ramses II. Now what? Churchenman's is bigger. Now what? It's more about shape, not size. Amenhotep's nose is likewise narrow with a high nose bridge similar to Ramses and Churchenman. Bone structure doesn't change. Now what? And they all have straight hair. Now what? So now race is decided by nasal survival. Centuries of decay or preservation are the ultimate arbiter of truth. How much more ludicrous is the Afrocentric argument going to get? Nothing will ever justify planting a Platyrrhine nose onto a Leptorrhine individual. Nothing could be more blatant, more cringe-worthy, more disrespectful, more wretched. At what level does someone have to be obsessed with distorting and disfiguring images of the dead, all from a swivel chair, just to fit a false narrative? He's literally telling his clapping seals that the statues and mummies aren't good enough, that they aren't black or black enough. So he resorts to image manipulation, a form mind manipulation. He's a predatory snake oil salesman selling lies to a depressed group of racists. Some people will literally do anything for $1, and he's one of them. It makes you wonder if he actually believes the lies he sells. Tweaking a feature here, altering a trait there, until the statue or mummy suddenly looks like someone out of the equatorial jungles of Sub-Sahara. The sheer audacity of squatting on someone else's ancestors and turning them into something they most certainly were not, all while ignoring his own, is staggering. Welcome to Afrocentrism, an utterly preposterous failed ideology. Look at that hair, straight as a board. That's not a Negroid trait at all. None of it is. The standard Afrocentric excuse, when it comes to the straight hair in Egyptian mummies, is to lie about the hair supposedly having kinked out after death. There are Egyptian mummies with both straight hair and wavy hair, and mummies with straight or wavy-haired wigs, which might even be their own hair. Some even have ringlets. Another pathetic excuse is that the preservatives straightened out the kink. The preservatives did what they were supposed to do, preserve. By Afrocentric logic, any mummy with wavy or ringlet hair should also have ended up with straight hair. And yet we still find those textures intact. Wavy or curly hair would be even easier to distort than tightly coiled hair, yet no negroid kink ever appears. If Egypt had truly been full of black skin and black phenotypes, we'd see that preserved en masse, but we don't. The complete absence of tightly coiled standard negroid hair speaks volumes. Excuse after excuse only underscores the fact that these features were never there to begin with. There's only one Nilotic individual buried in the Valley of the Kings. 1. His phenotype is apparent with bimaxillary prognathism and kinky hair. Wig or not, it kept its kink. Afrocentrics prop this singleton outlier up, as if it is the standard bearer of the Egyptian populace as a whole. They say ancient Egypt was black, while pointing to an orthnathic population of straight-haired people with Eurasian DNA. What's left? Afrocentrics can only make excuses as to why ancient Egyptians don't have black skin or black phenotypes, why they don't have kinky hair, why they don't have Platyrrhine noses, sub-Saharan haplogroups, genomes, cranial or dental traits, why they don't cluster with sub-Saharans on PCA or belong to any sub-Saharan language phyla. With this much evidence stacked against them and this many excuses, it's obvious they're living in a world of denial. Let's examine several pivotal studies that consolidate and reinforce the information covered in this discussion. This study examines the late Bronze Age II population from Tel Shaddud in the central Jezreel Valley of Israel, another find that predates Iron Age Lachish and provides context for the Lachish individual's affinity with the Old Kingdom Nuerat individual. This is interesting since these zealots will never freely share this with their audience. A seemingly isolated clay coffin with anthropoid lid, containing a single primary burial, was uncovered within a 6-meter by 5-meter probe bordering the lower east slope of Tel Shaddud in the Jezreel Valley. Together, these burials form part of an apparent late Bronze Age, II-Iron Age I burial ground at the eastern margin of Tel Shaddud. The coffin and associated funerary gifts bear a strong resemblance to comparable specimens and associated funerary assemblages known foremost from Deir el-Bala in the Gaza Strip and Bet Shean in the Jordan Valley. The shared mortuary aspects of Tel Shaddud and the latter sites indicate a strong link with New Kingdom Egypt. Shaddud was a way station or estate functioning within the framework of the Egyptian New Kingdom colonization of the region during the late Bronze Age II and succeeding Iron Age I. The location of Tel Shaddud and Lachish in relation to Tel Shaddud and the anthropoid coffin that was discovered. The Tel Shaddud individual L112 was dated to during the reign of Seti I due to the scarab ring found in his coffin, which is about 1294 BC. This is how Bronze Age Levantines from Tel Shaddud depicted themselves. Phenotypically, they are Caucasoid. Why TKM insists these people were black skin with black phenotype when the evidence repudiates such an accusations is nothing but pure cope. Principal components analysis of two Shaddud individuals, L112 and L126, was carried out within the framework described in Lazaridis. This analysis showed that the two individuals cluster genetically, with similar estimated proportions of ancestry from diverse West Eurasian ancestral sources. These results are consistent with the hypothesis that they derive from the same population, or alternatively that they derive from two quite closely related populations. To the limits of our current resolution, there is no indication of any sub-Saharan African genetic material in either of these samples. Did you hear that? There is no indication of any sub-Saharan African genetic material in either of these samples. Archaeological, anthropological, and artistic records show no trace of sub-Saharan phenotypes in the Levant or Arabia during the Bronze or Iron Ages or at any point. Egyptian depictions of Bronze Age and Iron Age Levantines, alongside skeletal remains, such as those from Lachish and Tel Shaddud, demonstrate that the populations of these regions were distinct from sub-Saharan groups. When projected against published data for Western Eurasians, the individuals from Tel Shaddud cluster with ancient and modern Eurasian populations, exactly as expected. They do not align with Bantu, Nilotic, Khoisan, Ethiopian, or other sub-Saharan groups. As the study states, there is no evidence of sub-Saharan African genetic input in either sample, refuting TKM's swivel chair empty claim of a pervasive black phenotype and black skin across the Levant and Arabia. Ancient DNA from Chalcolithic Israel 4,500 to 3,400 BC confirms the prevalence of light skin alleles well before the Bronze and Iron Ages, making TKM's claim of a black-skinned Levant and Arabia genetically impossible. By the time of the Iron Age, the Lachish individual further reinforces this, showing clear affinity with Nuerat rather than any sub-Saharan group. An allele G at RS12913832 near the OCA2 gene, with a proven association to blue eye color in individuals of European descent, has an estimated alternative allele frequency of 49% in the Levant Chalcolithic population, suggesting that the blue-eyed phenotype was common in the Levant Chalcolithic. Second, an allele at RS14266654 in the SLC24A5 gene, which is one of the most important determinants of light pigmentation in West Eurasians, is fixed for the derived allele A in the Levant Chalcolithic population, suggesting that a light-skinned phenotype may have been common in this population. Light skin alleles were prevalent during the Chalcolithic period. Well before the Bronze Age and Iron Age, this includes our Iron Age Lachish individual, who shares affinity with the Old Kingdom Nuerat individual, saying that their black skin, black phenotype because it makes you feel good about your situation in life doesn't cut it. He makes these wild assertions without any evidence whatsoever, and as you've seen, the evidence cuts through his false assertions outright. Now that we've covered the Levant and into central China, what about light skin alleles in Africa? Let's see. Let's look at a study regarding the skin color and ancient Bahrain Tylos population and what they mean by dark skin. Keep in mind these people have a high Natufian-related ancestry. 2 samples were predicted to have dark skin pigmentation, whereas the results for the remaining 2 samples were less certain, with AS_EMT potentially having relatively lighter skin pigmentation. The predicted phenotypes found in ancient Bahrain are similar to those in present-day Middle Easterners and South Asians. Within these regions, subtle geographical trends occur at the level of skin pigmentation. Specifically, non-Bedouin Levantine groups from the Human Genome Diversity Project tend to have higher proportions of intermediate skin pigmentation, while Pakistanis tend to have higher proportions of dark skin than most Levantine populations, especially in the south. This is an example of dark-skinned Pakistani as per the Herisplex S program described in the study. It does not correspond to the black skin or sub-Saharan phenotype that TKM promotes. In fact, it aligns more closely with skin tones, phenotypes, and straight hair seen in ancient Egyptian murals. The same skin tone can be seen in Europeans such as this Italian man. Phenotypically, they're both Caucasoids, and Caucasoids cluster with ancient Egyptians in PCA. Dark skin and Caucasoid phenotype, not black skin and Negroid phenotype. Ancient Egyptians have a range of skin tones from light to dark, but never black. The baseless, racially charged narrative that everyone in the ancient world was black is unsubstantiated and has got to stop. This is the most damning piece of information yet. Irrefutable and undeniable. As 1426654A, ALA 111, Thurin SLC 24A5, associated with light skin color, has swept to near fixation in Europeans due to positive selection. Recent studies show that this SLC24A5 allele is also associated with light skin in Africans. Crawford et al. Performed a GWAS on 1,570 ethnically diverse Africans that spanned the full spectrum of skin pigment variation in Africa and found the strongest association at SLC24A5. Eurasian migrants with light skin alleles entered Africa more than 5,000 years ago, primarily through Egypt. These alleles are associated with Afroasiatic populations, with Egypt the premier entry point for these traits served as a central corridor for their spread into East Africa. Light skin alleles also entered into Africa from Iberia during the Neolithic. The derived RS56203814T and RS10424065T alleles associated with dark pigmentation are present only in African populations or those of recent African descent and are most common in East African populations with Nilo-Saharan ancestry. The ancestral G and T alleles, respectively, associated with light pigmentation, are nearly fixed in Europeans and East Asians, and are common in San as well as Ethiopian and Tanzanian populations with Afroasiatic ancestry. Nuerat Old Kingdom individual was tested for the classic West Eurasian light skin alleles SLC24A5, SLC45A2, etc., but not for the sub-Saharan derived alleles MFSD12RS 562038114T or RRS10424065T. These skin pigmentation alleles are only present in sub-Saharas. The nonsense that everyone was black in the ancient world is nothing more than an Afrocentric black supremacist lie. This evidence shows that ancient Egyptians did not admix with Nilotic groups, such as Dinka-like populations at the time, nor did ancient Egyptians derive from Nilotics. Nilotics carry derived alleles restricted to southern Sudan, sub-Sahara, and lack the light skin alleles present in ancient Egyptians or in admixed East Africans, such as Ethiopians and Tanzanians, who possess a Eurasian genetic component. This diagram shows Eurasian spread into Egypt and beyond. With Eurasians, the spread of the light skin alleles continued. Egyptian artisans deliberately distinguished themselves from Nilotic groups. In this depiction, the pharaoh shares skin tone and phenotype with his Levantine enemies, standing in clear contrast to his Nilotic adversary. Any Afrocentric with integrity would acknowledge this distinction. Afrocentrics focus on the skin color prediction while ignoring the full AUC and the alleles marked as NA in the model. These are predictions, not definitive evidence, which is why grayscale reconstructions were used. In fact, the HIRIS-Plex S system was missing 5 SNPs for skin pigmentation. For Nuerat, the model predicted a 56% probability of dark skin and a 37% probability of black skin. The allele A111TRS1426654A indicates light skin. He had a as derived skin, and also one of the missing SNPs was for SLC45A2. He may have been lighter than the model suggests, and if dark, the lightest in that category. The other SNPs for light skin are RS2555364 and RS169606620, not in the list of SNPs tested. PCA of Nuerat Old Kingdom individual shows no affinity to any ancient and/or modern sub-Saharans, including South Africa, Congo, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Malawi, Kenya, Uganda, Cameroon, Botswana, instead consistently clusters with West Eurasia, Caucasus, and North Africa. Old Kingdom Nuerat is classified as Eurasian, as he clusters genetically, cranially, dentally with Caucasoid populations. Nasal bones of Lachish skulls place them within range of European crania, and this is the population that Nuerat clusters with. Thus, in line with genetic results, the Nuarat individual appears most akin phonetically to Western Eurasians rather than sub-Saharans dentally and more specifically pre-modern West Asians such as Lachish based on craniometrics. It is secondarily most similar in craniometric dimensions to ancient Egyptians of a more recent time. Let's circle back to the ignorant remark he made at the beginning of this video.
Any of these kind of like old Neolithic samples, you know, anything from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, probably right up until quite recent, you're going to be dealing with black people across the Levant, the Arabian Peninsula, and Africa.
Now watch him flip-flop and contradict his own argument from a video 2 years ago.
On my palette, I call it the lower side because it represents lower Kemet. If we look at the bottom, we have this clearly Levantine man. He's clearly a kind of Eurasian or Asiatic man. You can see it's in his depiction. He has a completely different phenotype.
We're clearly dealing with a dishonest figure who shifts positions whenever it's convenient. There's no consistency, no integrity, just a game of saying whatever suits the moment. Such shifts prioritize narrative over evidence, a classic Afrocentric tactic. You see, before the Nuarat genome was published, Levantines were distinct in phenotype from ancient Egyptians. After the Nuarat genome was published, now magically, Levantines are black skin and black phenotype. This reversal underscores the methodological inconsistency always present in such arguments, where interpretations are reshaped to align with preconceived conclusions and wishful thinking, rather than grounded in the archaeological and genetic record. They rely on rewriting the evidence and revising history instead of accepting it.
Results from the linear discriminant function analysis in the program revealed that the Nuarat cranium most closely resembles, in descending order, a sample of Iron Age male crania from West Asia. Okay, so Iron Age male from West Asia, namely Lachish, Palestine, with a probability of group membership at 0.53. Okay, that's 53%. Sounds pretty high, yeah, pretty conclusive.
And that's a wrap.